shot towards the end zone. Underthrown, touchdown! Trey Tucker to the end zone it goes. Caught! Touchdown, Armand Benz.
Bearcat Blitz. How we doing, everybody, on this mid-September episode of Bearcat Blitz right here on the Believe Network? I'm your host, Russ Heltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. Check out the website there and check out my co-host, Neil Meyer, joining us here as he does twice a week with me on the show. He of Cincinnati Rivals, frontofficenews.com, the Rivals affiliate covering Cincinnati athletics. And we have a fun show for everybody today, diving into a potential first recruit commitment for Wes Miller and the Bearcats in the class of 2025. This is right around the time when you start getting that first commitment. And I don't know about Neil, but we'll see his confidence. I think everybody in Bearcats land is pretty confident that one is going to happen this weekend. We'll get to that name and his impact, potential impact, to start the show. Plus a preview of Houston, the lone Big 12 football win for Cincinnati last year. They're trying to start their 2024 Big 12 slate with a win and consecutive victories over Houston as they make the trip to Cincinnati this time around, with Cincinnati getting the road win last year in Houston. Before we do all that, though, I want to tell you about Bet Online. It's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. And Neil, Kashawn Tillery, 2025 recruit, is potentially committing to Cincinnati this weekend. He has a Friday afternoon commitment time set and will be committing at 4 p.m. and going through a list of names that includes Cincinnati, Virginia, and Wake Forest. Really interesting type of player, type of talent. You see Neil focusing on kind of the younger backcourt pieces for this class, guys that are potentially going to be lead ball handlers in the years to come for Wes Miller's crew. Tillery out of New Hampton School, ranked 66th nationally on 24/7 Sports composite rankings, 11th best point guard, and number 2 player in New Hampshire at 6 foot, 184 pounds. Tillery, a guy that has a lot of bounce at the guard position, can really speed up the offense in transition, and is pretty much a bulldog on defense. It's kind of a theme that you're seeing with these guard recruits that Wes Miller's bringing in, really intense on the defensive end of the floor, and he uses that bounce to get a lot more blocks than you're used to seeing out of guards. So this would be an interesting addition, Neil, I think, for Wes Miller and the Bearcats. Another top 70, top 60, maybe potentially, depending on what he does in this senior year, top 50 recruit added to the fold. And they just keep churning out the 4-star commitments, Neil, year in and year out, potentially. Everything kind of looking like Tillery will pick Cincinnati. He has been crystal balled by 3 major services on 3 Rivals and 24/7 Sports. All have Cincinnati landing Tillery when he announces that commitment on Friday. Not necessarily a done deal, Neil, but when you have that many outlets saying that this guy's going to commit to one spot, it would be a shock to see him pick Cincinnati, or to see him pick Virginia, or what was the other one? Wake Forest, I think it was.
Wake Forest.
Yeah.
But overall, Russ, obviously, this is a big time prospect in the 2025 class, because for those who haven't followed Kashawn Tillery's recruitment process, he is one of the highest stock risers within the 2025 class, Russ, because since June, for those who haven't followed, like we mentioned, he's climbed nearly 80 spots in the 2025 rankings. He sits 53rd nationally, according to our site over at Rivals.com. So it's a huge prospect for Cincinnati. And you look at the timeline for Cincinnati, they offered him back on May 30th of 2024. He took an official visit this past weekend. And overall, this is a big-time guard. As you mentioned, he is 6 foot, 6'1", 195 pounds, or 180 pounds, sorry. But a huge guard, can really, really score the ball. But Russ, as you mentioned, is one of those elite defenders, can really block shots and alter shots, but he's one of those nitty-gritty defenders. But this is a big-time prospect within the 2024 or 2025 recruiting class. But it's worth noting, Russ as well, that Wes Miller and this staff continue to get 4 and 5 stars on campus. And that's a huge thing because you look at the recruiting realm nowadays, anytime you can get a 4-star on campus or a 5-star on campus, you must be doing something right because people are coming, people are taking notice of what Cincinnati and the staff are doing. But overall, they still have some things left in the fold. Obviously, nobody knows the full decision, but Virginia, Wake Forest, and Cincinnati are the final 3 for Keyshawn Tillery. And I mean, Russ, you're looking down at some of the schools he has offers from. I mean, he took a visit to Ohio State. He took an official visit to Kansas. So Oklahoma offered him.
Right.
Paul offered him. So, I mean, you're looking at these lists of schools.
Florida in there.
Florida, Georgia Tech has offered him. Iowa, Ohio State, Northwestern, Oklahoma, Rutgers, Tennessee's in the mix. So
28
overall,
total offers for Tillery. That's a hefty amount for sure. So
and
I think, Neil, as you mentioned, UC has done this on football side and the basketball side where they have gotten in early. They built that relationship while the player is exploding in the prep rankings, exploding in the summer circuit, and then they're there in the end and they're saying, hey, we were here long before all these other schools started flowing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at it on both sides, whether that's football or basketball, Russ. I mean, this is a great site on the basketball aspect because they have been in contact with Tillery for roughly the last 6 months, roughly to say the least. And then you see him have a big summer on the EYBL circuit. He goes off in the summer, sees his rankings climb higher. But on the football aspect of the things, we look at it, Jahari Medlock is one of those guys where it's like Cincinnati's football staff's doing the same thing. They get in there, they identified him early after a camp in the summer, get him to commit to Cincinnati, and then look where we are 2 months later. He's got an offer from Georgia and Florida on the SEC side of things. So overall, once they find their guys, they're very good at identifying the talent early and building that relationship. And that's crucial in terms of recruiting. But it's going to be a fun day on Friday to see wherever Keyshawn Tillery ends up.
4 p.m. commitment time. And what could be the first commitment for Wes Miller in the class of 2025 would be a strong start, as Neil mentioned, largely a top, wherever you're looking, at least a top 60, top 65 recruit and some top 55, top 50 rankings, depending on what recruiting service you look at there for Keyshawn Tillery. 6 weeks away, Neil, from hoops, getting rolling from the fervent pace of November, covering Cincinnati Bearcats athletics. Very excited for that. Excited to get back in the fold, covering basketball and get the fellas back on the hardwood. They're practicing right now. They released photos on Wednesday of them doing practice. I saw a video of Jizzle James throwing down an open court dunk. So
through the legs, a nice little East day.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was an awesome sight to see. And hopefully we'll see plenty of that. Bearcats fans are hoping to see plenty of that. And I would love to cover some between the legs dunks. I love seeing those electrifying moments.
Hey, I mean, we saw a couple electric dunks last year, Russ, if we remember. Day Thomas was he was close to catching a few bodies and posters last season. I mean, the one where he went up and over somebody who was 7 foot nearly was incredible. Hopefully that happens a few times this season and actually ends up on a couple posters.
One more year in the Monster Factory, maybe those legs and bounce got a little bit more monstrous, just monstrous enough to throw down those slams. We'll find out. We'll start to find out in less than 2 months. Cannot wait for all the sports to be going at the same time in the fall. Neil Meyer, Russ Eltman coming back after these messages to preview the Houston matchup at Nippert Stadium this Saturday, featuring the likes of Marty Gilliard and Sean Kilpatrick coming back fresh off of their Friday night induction into the James Kelly UC Athletics Hall of Fame. All that coming up right here on Bearcat Blitz. Bearcat Blitz rolling along here on the Believe Network. Russ Heltman, your host, joined by my co-host Neil Meyer of the frontofficenews.com Cincinnati Rivals affiliate, and Russ Heltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. Neil, let's get to the Titanic matchup this weekend as Cincinnati welcomes in a horrific Houston offense and a rather stout Houston defense for this matchup. 2-1 record the Bearcats have to a 1-2 record for Houston. Got their first win of the season, 33-7 over Rice this past weekend. They enter as a 3.5-point underdog. Houston is, after opening as a 5.5-point underdog to start the week. So bettors flocking to take Houston. We'll see if they're wrong in back-to-back weeks after bettors flocked to take the Miami Redhawks last week. ESPN Matchup Predictor has Cincinnati marked as a 62% favorite to win this game, and they are ranked 63rd on Bill Connolly's S&P Plus to Houston's number 78 mark. Actually, I think the line might have moved against Cincinnati last week, or with Cincinnati last week, in their favored run against Miami. I'm not exactly quite sure that there. Don't check me on that. Don't quote me on that, at least. Houston, Neil, 15-14 all-time edge in this series. Cincinnati is 8-6 against the Cougars. And overall, as we start this look on the offensive side of the ball for Cincinnati, I think that's the place to start, going up against this defense. 75th in S&P Plus, but those are largely still leaning on the preseason metrics a little bit. By all means, Neil, this defense has been top 30, top 35 through the first 3 weeks of the season, especially against the pass. They are really, really good against the throw game. They gave up just 16 points to Oklahoma a couple weeks ago. They're 26th in defensive EPA allowed overall, 11th in passing EPA, but 81st in rushing EPA allowed. Neil, to me, this is a game where you just ask Brendan Sorsby to make 10, maybe 12, 13 good throws. You run the football 40 to 50 times. You mash that Houston defensive front into oblivion with Corey Kiner and company. If Corey has 25 plus carries, 20 plus carries in this one, I don't see how Cincinnati isn't going to have the clock on their side enough and isn't going to have the defensive advantages that we'll get to in just a minute on the other side of the ball to keep Houston from scoring 20 plus points and ultimately get past that median on their own right. This to me feels like a grind out game, Neil, where you just bleed that clock down. You try to make as little mistakes as possible, no turnovers. As long as they don't have a turnover, I think they should win this football game behind the legs of Corey Kiner, Evan Pryor, and that rushing attack. Brendan Sorsby as well. I would be surprised if we don't see Sorsby even run a little bit more this week than we have seen him run in the first 3 weeks of the season. Houston can be bludgeoned on the ground, Neil, at the end of games, later in downs, later in possessions, later in drives. You have to stick with it against this defense that is kind of middle of the pack in raw statistics against the run wise. When you look at the fact that they are, I think, giving up about 3.2 yards per carry, 3.25 yards per carry, something like that. I think you got to lean on Corey Kiner in this rushing attack. All three kind of heads of the rushing attack. When you think about Pryor, Kiner, and Sorsby, in a matchup where there is clearly one phase of the defense that you can pick on.
Yeah, Russ, absolutely. And I think the reason that we're saying rely on Corey Kiner is, I mean, look at what he has been able to do when he has had more than 20 carries in the ball game, Russ. I mean, right now you're looking at his stats for the 2023 season, or the 2024 season, my bad. 48 carries, 326 yards, a touchdown, but 7 yards a carry roughly. And what Scott Satterfield alluded to earlier this week in his press conference, that they feel that Corey Kiner is at his best when he gets at least 20 carries a game. And I mean, Russ, you and I both know that. Like, we have seen that up close and personal, because that Miami game Saturday, when they needed a play, Corey Kiner came through and barrel rolled reigning defensive player of the year in the MAC conference, Matt Salopak.
Was that the "I wanted it more" quote? Was that the one you asked about?
I wanted it more quote from Corey Kiner, and that was that run right there said it, because without that run, that 50-yard field goal might not happen. Like, he ripped that off for 40 yards. That's a big play, momentum-changing play in that game. So overall, Corey Kiner, this is a game where you rely heavy on him. And the reason I say that, Russ, was you look at what Cincinnati did versus Houston a year ago. You have your whole offensive line returning, and it's worth noting on the offensive side of things this week, it's trending like D'Artagnan Tinsley status will be trending towards an out for Saturday, based off what we heard from Scott Satterfield in his
look for what, Jonathan Harder or DeAndre Buford at that spot at the guard position. Look
for one of those two to be at the guard spot. But worth noting, Philip Wilder is set to make his return as well, which is a huge bolster on the offensive line there, getting him back, because he was projected to be the starter at that right tackle position heading into the season. But You get your offensive line back. Corey is running hard right now. And I think this is the best that he is running throughout his career. But it's worth noting, look back on what he did last year versus Houston. Russ, 23 carries versus Houston, 23 carries, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns, averaging 6 yards a carry. And the Bearcats' only Big 12 victory a season ago, 24-14. I think you run right back to him. There's no other way to get this offense going, because when Corey Kiner starts to open things up, Russ, you and I both know, everybody knows, the pass game will open up. Xavier Henderson will get his reps. Joe Royer could have a huge impact as well. But it starts with Corey Kiner, and Corey Kiner has arguably been one of the best offensive players for Cincinnati this year. Like, MVP right now would have to go to Corey Kiner or Brendan Sorsby, one of those two. But if it's me, I'm giving it to Corey Kiner just because of what he's like doing right now. Like, it's ungodly numbers to see a guy, especially at his size, 5'9", 215, averaging 7.5 yards a carry and bulldozing people. So you have that aspect. If Cincinnati can get him the ball and repeat that, that is going to be a huge advantage point to them on Saturday. And Russ, it's actually worth noting that I was talking to Gavin Gerhardt earlier this week about Corey Kiner and the impact he has had on this season. And all we have heard all offseason from Corey and teammates was Corey has lived in the facility, lived in the weight room. And Russ, it's poised to show that he's taking the next step there to transition to hopefully go down to the NFL, but as a leader as well. And I mean, Cincinnati knows, like, he's on pace right now, Russ. He's averaging 108 yards a game. So he's on pace for a career high 1,300 yards roughly. Think about that.
It's showing up, man. He's not only poised, Neil, to go to the NFL. He will be a top 3 round pick at this rate going to the NFL. Top 4, top 5 round. I would say definitely top 5 round pick playing like this. He's going to have to show some more in the pass game to, I think, get up to that 2nd, 3rd round area and keep showing his chops in the pass protection game as well. Just overall pass receiving, pass blocking. That's kind of the biggest steps he's still got to take. But Neil, he's running as well as any power conference running back in the country. I mean, you could put him up there with anybody outside of Ashton Genty. And yeah, you mentioned he's got 25 missed tackles forced, which is number 1 in the entire power conference. And I mean, slate, and that's from PFF, I think, released that yesterday.
Yeah, and you look back on that, Russ, he's forced 25 missed tackles through 3 weeks. Think about that. He's making guys miss at the very first point of contact in the backfield that should be losses of 4 or 5 yards. And he's turning it uphill for gains of 6-7 yards. Like, not many running backs do that in the country. So, I mean, to see Corey Kiner rip that off is huge. And it's also worth noting, too, Russ, when I was talking to Gavin, I asked him specifically about that play versus Miami. I said, what happened on that play? And Gavin goes, I missed the read. I missed my check. So that play wasn't supposed to happen. He said when Corey barrel rolled him, everyone kind of stood there and was kind of caught by surprise. And Corey was like, oh, I just ran through this guy. And he goes, that's why we saw that second speed, because he was like, Corey was like, oh, I just barrel rolled him. Like, I just came through and now I got an open field. So overall, that was a good quote to hear. But Russ, it's also like you talk about Corey Kiner and the run game, the impact the run game could have. It's worth noting Houston will be without one of their top defensive backs for the first half of this contest due to a targeting call in the second half last week versus Rice and Jawan Gaston. So that's a huge blow as well. So there's a lot of things that really could happen. Do we see Cincinnati take the advantage in that matchup early in the passing game? Or did we look to see Corey Kiner get 15 carries in the first half and have a career day? So you never know, but it could go either way. But hopefully the trend keeps continuing, because Scott Satterfield alluded to it. When Corey Kiner gets 20 or more carries, that's when he's at his best. And he, quote unquote, called Corey Kiner a stud. So hopefully when Kiner gets 20 carries on Saturday, Bearcats end up with another victory. First Big 12 victory at Nippert Stadium. That's where I'm rocking with.
Yeah, Houston's given up 3.42 yards per carry and 1 touchdown so far this season. So on the surface,
the challenge at hand, pretty solid
numbers. But underneath, Neil, not as strong at all. When you think about EPA per rush, EPA per play on EPA per rush, 0.033 EPA per rush allowed this season, 81st nationally. And they are giving up a run rate over expected of 6.9%, 104th nationally. What does that mean? It means opponents know that to attack Houston, you got to attack that run defense 6.9% higher than expected amount of the time than you are going to throw the ball. even without the elite cornerback and defensive back there in the first half, I still think the game plan should be lean on Corey Kiner, try to get up to 45, 50 carries as a team in this game, and just bludgeon Houston, who it's going to take long drives and red zone execution, Neil, a number that they still have not figured out. And we'll see if they can start to figure out in the non-conference slate. There have been some fluke plays here and there that have kept them from scoring touchdowns in the red zone. The fumble last week, a perfect example by Joe Royer. But all in all, they're still 106 nationally in red zone TD percentage through the first 3 weeks of the college football season. That's going to have to change. And I think they're going to have to play better than 106th nationally ranked red zone touchdown team this Saturday to get the job done. I think they can, though, because like I mentioned, there have been a few instances like the Joe Royer fumble that have been a little fluky in a small sample size to start the first 3 games of the season. This team does not give up a lot of big plays, Neil, and they force you to have a long drive. Cincinnati's going to have to execute. They've given up just 4 plays of 20-plus yards through the air. That's 16th best in the country. They're allowing a 30.5% drop back success rate. So down to down, they're not giving you a lot through the air. That's 7th best nationally. This is going to be the toughest test so far for Brendan Sorsby. And I think to alleviate the difficulty of that test, you lean on that rushing game. Taking a quick break here and then looking at the defense to close out the show. And we have a prediction on top of it. Neil, I'll let you take the reins on the defensive side of things when we look at Houston's offense against Cincinnati's defense here. There's not a lot of daunting things that the Houston Cougars bring to the table on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, outside of a quarterback who's 6'5", 240 pounds, it's not like they have many weapons there in the pass game. They have a running back who has quick speed, but outside of that, they don't have many big play targets. Obviously, Joseph Manjack is the go-to receiver out there in Houston. But overall, Russ, this is a dual threat quarterback. We have seen Donovan Smith throughout the years during his time at Houston. Obviously, we talked about it earlier in the week, a guy coming off labrum surgery, a guy who really struggled versus Cincinnati last year. Now, he's had some good games like what we saw versus Oklahoma earlier in the year, where he went 24 for 28, 250 yards. But still, outside of that, it's been subpar games where if you make him throw the ball, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a game where you could force him into some throws if you get some pressure there. And Cincinnati saw that last year. They held Donovan Smith to just 102 yards in the air, despite having 2 touchdowns. But they forced Smith to 3 interceptions last year. I think if you get pressure, Dante Corleone, Jarrett Bartlett, Cam Rutherford, Eric Phillips, whoever that might be, hopefully Eric Phillips and Dante combine for a couple sacks alongside Jarrett Bartlett, because Eric Phillips is top 10 in the country in quarterback pressures right now. So you get some pressure to Donovan Smith, he's going to be a big guy. It's going to be similar to what we saw week 2 versus Eli Holston. He's going to be a bigger guy. It might be a little harder to bring down there in the passing game. Scott Satterfield even alluded to it, that they don't have anybody that can really play him in a scout team outside of a D end, is what they said. A D end or a tight end. He's a bigger guy. But if you can find a way to get to him, create pressure, and force him into some arrogant throws, I think this is the game where the Cincinnati Bearcats could really have a stellar day in the defensive game. Now, we saw it the last 2 weeks. Will we see it for a 3rd straight game on Saturday where the defense comes away with the turnover in the red zone? If they can do that and get those red zone stops, red zone turnovers, that will be the difference maker in this game.
Donovan Smith averaging a interception per game through 2 in the first one, 1 in the second game, and none against Rice. I just don't see how he's going to be good enough, Neil, for this team to get past 20 points. And if they can't get past 20 points, I would be shocked if the winner of this game does not cross that margin. So to me, it's just keep this offense in front of you. It's the biggest issue for the Bearcats. I think overall is just still big plays. They're giving up a little bit too many big plays overall this season. Tightened it up a little bit last week. Much better against the run, big play factor. Much better against the run overall. I think it was the fewest yards they've given up on the ground, Neil. There was like 33 total or something like that. It was less than 35. Fewest yards they've given up on the ground as a program since 2021, I believe Scott Satterfield said. So pairing that type of performance on the ground again with another great performance on the ground against the ground attack would be very, very crucial here. And if you do that, I just don't see how Donovan Smith's going to be able to pass well enough and execute this offense well enough, snap to snap, as the 93rd ranked quarterback by ESPN QBR this season. He has just been not solid, not sharp at all. And it's just very one-dimensional out of Houston. You can make them one-dimensional in a hurry. They're 117th, Neil, in EPA per rush this season, expected points added per rush, and they're only putting up 3.2 yards per carry. They're in the bottom of the barrel in the traditional running metrics and the advanced running metrics. On top of that, Neil, they're terrible on special teams as well. That will mix in here. UC has been much better, especially the last 2 weeks on special teams. I could see Mason Fletcher pinning them inside the 23, maybe 4 times here. I would take Nathan Hawks over the Houston kicker at this point right now. And when you think about the fact that they've already forced a special teams turnover and the way that these gunners are covering these punts right now on both sides of the ball in terms of attacking the punter on defensive special teams and gunning down punts on the other end of the field on the offensive special teams, that's a massive advantage for UC right now, ranking 60th nationally in S&P Plus on special team side of things. To I believe it's a really bad number for Houston, 131st out of 134 teams in S&P Plus special teams numbers right now. So I think the advantage, massive advantage in that phase of the game, paired with the, I would say, overall talent advantage on defense and a non-daunting quarterback matchup that you have to deal with. All in all, Neil, they just have to keep this offense in front of them. Don't give up 10 plus 15-yard plays to Donovan Smith and company, and they should be able to win this game, in my opinion. 23-17, I'm rolling with the Bearcats. And on top of that, Neil, you brought up the pressures. Eric Phillips, tied for 6th nationally among Power 4 players with 14 pressures so far this season. He's either got, I think he's got 3 sacks right now.
2 sacks.
I see this as a field day for Eric. He can totally eat up, keep adding to what is maybe a burgeoning NFL draft resume. 11 sacks given up by Houston so far this season. That is horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I think it's the bottom 15 nationally overall. So there are plenty of paths to havoc making for the Cincinnati defense in this one. And I see them doing a pretty good job of it and largely driving a win 23-17 as the offense does just enough with a couple Nathan Hawks field goals mixed in to get the job done at home and get the 3-1 with a road trip to Texas Tech up next. What do you got, Neil? What's your score prediction?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a different score projection, Russ. I'm going to go 28-21 in favor of the Bearcats. I think it's going to be a game where it's going to be a battle of offenses. Obviously, Houston's defense makes you drives extend, their nitty-gritty defense, but you got to capitalize on it. I don't think this is a game where we're expecting to see a combined 60 points on the board. This is going to be a 28-21 battle. It's going to be something low scoring. But I think the Bearcats get the job done. They entered this match about 6.5-point favorites a week ago. They're still trending as 3.5-point favorites in this one. But the momentum is high, and the confidence and morale of the locker room is in a spot where, we haven't seen it in a year and a half between these guys following what happened last season. So the morale is high. The confidence.
What was it this time last year? They were coming off. This was a few days after the Miami loss. This time last year,
Miami
right?
Loss.
So way different.
Overall, I think this is a game where Cincinnati could win 28-21 and improve to 3-1 heading into Texas Tech with a big opportunity looming ahead down in Lubbock, Texas, with for them to even significantly improve their record heading into Week 6.
He's Neil Meyer. I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network, presented by Bet Online. Enjoy the game this Saturday, everybody. 12 p.m. kickoff across FS1. Tune into that, and we'll be back at you, coming with another show to recap it all on Monday, right here on Bearcat Blitz, presented by Bet Online.
6, Ritter to the end zone, looking for Pierce. Did he hang on? Yes. Touchdown. The back as I've been around. Here he goes again. Busts free. Jerome Ford down the sideline. Foot race. Pass call. Touchdown. 79 yards. Big run in the Peach Bowl. This is a big one, too.